Hello, Cinefans. I'm Kendall Groover, and this is Watching Classic Movies. My guest is Millie De Chirico, programmer for Turner Classic Movies, including TCM Underground, and co-host of the essential movie podcast, I Saw What You Did. While it is a period in her career that many find lacking, Millie and I are big fans of the movies Elizabeth Taylor made from the mid-60s through the 70s. We had a talk about the unique magic of Taylor in middle age. Still beautiful and outrageously famous, but making bolder choices in her performances and choice of roles. Welcome, Millie. Thank you for joining me today.
Oh my gosh, thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Well, now ever since you program Boom at the TCM Classic Film Festival, I have wanted to have a talk with you about Elizabeth Taylor. And that desire increased when on your Instagram, you said something about Elizabeth Taylor from about the mid-60s through the 70s is your favorite actress, which is precisely how I feel about Elizabeth Taylor. So tell me what you love about Elizabeth Taylor in this period.
Oh my gosh, there's just so much. So there are moments, I think, before in her filmography where I feel like it's kind of like a precursor to obviously stuff like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, but also even to me, like Suddenly Last Summer, which, it was still like late 50s, kind of her, that era, the classic Liz era or whatever. But there are moments, I think, that are scattered within her, even her early work, that it feels like it was sort of like a precursor to what this era that we love is, right? I think for me personally, she seems, and I've never having known her, only reading about her and kind of studying her films as a viewer, to me, she has this big kind of like FU attitude almost to her earlier career. She feels a lot more daring. She's really not trying to be the demure, cute girl that she was always known for. She's taking a lot of risks. And like, there's something about that to me that just really strikes me as interesting and compelling because, at that point, she was obviously like moving towards middle age. She was a child star. She had been in the business for so long. And I think that it was that period where she started making these like late 60s, 70s films. I mean, part of it is because of the films just in general that were coming out in this era. They were a lot more psychedelic or experimental, like a lot artsier, especially in Europe. But it's that thing where I'm like, well, she's also like going there in a lot of ways. Like she's kind of refusing to be cute, and she's, essentially embracing herself as a fully formed human being and leaning into her middle age and like that kind of thing. I just think that's really fascinating. Right.
Agreed on all points.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like there was a part of her that was rebelling against how restrictive her childhood had been. And she's just kind of like, screw you all. She's just yelling and throwing things. There's those calm moments too, where you see how she's developed as a performer, despite how odd these films are.
Yeah.
The best part of it is when she just cuts loose.
Yeah.
She just says, I've had enough. And, she's in her 40s. She's not going to be the star that she was, but she's never going to be anything but Elizabeth Taylor, the star.
Yes.
At the same time. So there's always this kind of level at which she's playing. It's always big.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like I think child stars are really fascinating to me because we're kind of seeing it a little now. Like, I feel like there's some people who are in Hollywood who were young and very, very famous. Some of them are now like pivoting towards art films. I start thinking about the Twilight films, especially. Like I think about Kristen Stewart and now I'm forgetting his name. God, that's so tragic. Robert Pattinson, that's his name. About how now, they were famous on a world scale, right? And when they were in their teens. And then now when they have the options, they like to be in more interesting films and they work with kind of European or international directors or art directors. And I'm like, that to me feels like what Elizabeth Taylor was kind of doing in this era, is that she was choosing to go to Italy and Europe and make movies with Joseph Losey. And so it's like a kind of to me, it kind of symbolizes the fact that she was just like, well, I worked under the studio system at a very young age, and I was always prized for my beauty. I mean, I read the Donald Bogle biography that he did about her and Michael Jackson, and just about how people would just like stop dead in the street seeing her. Like, her beauty was so prized from such a young age that, at some point she probably even told herself like, God, I have to transition out of this somehow. I can't be this my entire life. So how am I going to do it? And so I think that that's when she was basically making these films, is that she's like, well, I don't care. I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to burp and scream and drink and be kind of more authentically a person and not an ingenue. And I love it. And, part of what I think was interesting about that Boom screening at the film festival was that this film like hasn't played on TCM still, because the rights were like so in flux. And I think people see it as a genuine curiosity. I mean, it was always like one of those movies that was like, no one's seen it, and it's this legendary flop, and why is that happening? And so let's figure it all out together. And I think we all figured that out together, like in the screening, right?
Yes, because people hated it and loved it.
Yeah.
In equal measure. And sometimes it was the same person hating it and loving it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the look of it is enough to make you love it.
I think so. I mean, it's very, very white. Like I talk about this sometimes about how, so Boom and Secret Ceremony kind of came out at the same time, or they were at least released in the same year, I believe, or at least maybe a year apart. And both of them being Joseph Losey movies. And Secret Ceremony is like the total opposite from Boom. Boom is this like white, sandy beach, like sun-soaked artifact. And like Secret Ceremony is the dark, cloistered, Gothic, Baroque mansion, right? Yeah. So it's kind of like, do you take your Liz light or dark? Like what's your both are very legendary, both are deeply weird films at the core. But yeah, one is where like Liz is on a mountaintop with it living in like a mud walled room. I don't even know what this house is.
But yeah, just the yelling, the pure passion behind those outbursts. I don't see how you couldn't love this movie. I know it gets slow, and maybe that's part of it. But if you're at the midnight at TCM Film Festival, that's when you have your little nap,
right?
And then you wake up for the next thing. Yeah, it is an interesting contrast. I had thought about that with the Losey films. Secret Ceremony is where the famous burp takes place.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I mean, she's a little bit less screamy in Secret Ceremony, but she does have like insane moments in that movie too, where the burp, where she's just like eating and then burps in the middle of it. And I mean, there's outrageous scenes in that movie of like them taking a bath, her and Mia Farrow taking a bath together. Like Elizabeth Taylor gets her back licked by Mia Farrow at one point, and you're just like, what in the world is going on? But I mean, arguably one of the most famous women in Hollywood history getting her back licked is wild. Like, okay. But she went there.
And I mean, how many actresses do that sort of thing over and over again in those years? I'm trying to think of anybody else who did it. It was almost like she's the only one who could get away with it in a way.
Yeah. Well, and it's weird too, because I feel like there's like a handful of actresses who have done pretty daring European films. Like I think about, obviously actresses like Charlotte Rampling, or, just sort of like these women who were in ingenue roles, beautiful roles, and then just started going weirder and darker and more interesting as they got older. And I don't know. I mean, do you think that there's a connection to that? Do you think maybe it's an age thing? Do you think do you think it's like Hollywood forces? I mean, part of me is like, I'm trying not to be completely naive about stuff, but at the same time, I'm like, well, they don't actually have to be in art films either. Like, I feel like they're making choices. It's not like the whole stereotype about these kind of psychobitty type roles, or you're like, oh, it's so sad that Shelley Winters is in so many bad horror movies in the 70s and 80s. I'm like, is it though? Like, I don't think so. I think that she's still making choices. Like, she's still wanting to work.
And it always elevates it. It's always the funniest part. Why do I watch Tentacles? Because it's Shelley Winters. You know?
Well, right. And I just think that there's just like such weird attitudes towards that kind of stuff, like where we're feeling sorry for people who are appearing in films. And I'm just sort of like, well, maybe it's not always that. Maybe it's not, oh, poor Debbie Reynolds can't get work. And so she has to be like some weird murderer or something.
Maybe that's what they wanted all along, or maybe it's a break from all that glamour. I'm also kind of thinking of like Carol Baker.
Yeah.
What was it? The Lindsay films? Am I getting the director's name right? In Italy, she did like that trio of films.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and they're great trash. I mean, yeah, you know, she's not a Hollywood star anymore, but she's still gorgeous, and she really goes for it. It really is a little bit like the Taylor movies in some respect.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I'm that type of person. I'm sure you are too. Where it's nice to see. It's gorgeous. You see Elizabeth Taylor in like A Place in the Sun and you're like, oh my God, like gorgeous woman, like just so like effervescent and lovely. But to me, when I do watch something like Secret Ceremony, or when I watch like Night Watch or whatever, I'm like, I don't know. There's something else going on here. Like, I feel like there's something compelling about her, because she's still very glamorous and beautiful. Mm-hmm. But now she's kind of like not restrained.
It feels like a real woman.
Yeah.
I mean, Night Watch is definitely like that. There's moments that are maybe a little campy where she plays it up, but yeah, you really are just feeling a woman in terror, you know? Right. And it is completely unlike the Hollywood stuff. It's a complete departure. And I just wish I could have talked to her about this. Like, what were you thinking? What was in your head? What were you trying to do when you were making these films? Because I want to know how deliberate it was. Like, if she was resisting.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I want to believe that that's the case. I mean, I know that there is also extreme wealth and drinking involved. Yeah. You know, like, I know that when the Burtons were in Europe, they were a force to be reckoned with, obviously. But it's that thing of like, I don't know. I still think that even with all the money and the drinking,
I don't think she was shallow.
Yeah, I feel like she would still be making educated choices and not being like, well, I'm washed up, so I guess I'll just put on a caftan and start screaming around Italy or whatever in anyone's movie. I feel like she was still kind of there making deliberate choices for her career.
Well, this is what I love about it, is that she's developed as an actress. Like, I do love the camp stuff. I live for that. That's my bread and butter. But at the same time, there's this depth where she is kind of exploring herself as a person. And it does feel like that's different from the beginning. Like, I'm thinking about something like X, Y, and Z, which is probably my favorite from that period, because she does it all, because it is this amazing acting, but she's also just camp lines. She greets her husband's lover. If it isn't darling, just Stella. I mean, it's ridiculous. And it's so distinctly her. You know, you've seen this in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf.
Yeah.
And yet here you are in this wild, swinging, 60s movie, and she's doing it. Okay, I know you like this one too, right?
Oh, yeah. What's that line that she says that, I don't know if I can cuss on here, but she's just like, frankly, I don't give a shit. Like, she kind of puts that like fake Gone with the Wind accent on, and it cracks me up. I love it.
It just all feels like she's slamming her past, because that does to me, like, the way she does it. And just come back here. I'm not done with you yet. Everything in that movie is so funny.
Yeah.
The clothes, everything about it. And oh gosh, I'm spacing on her name now. The other star.
Not Susannah York. Is it Susannah?
Oh no,
York?
it is Susannah York.
Okay.
You got it. Yeah. I always kind of like her, but I absolutely despise her for not being interesting in this movie. I feel guilty about it.
Well, it's really hard too, because it's like you have to be in a movie with Elizabeth Taylor. So how big can you actually go? Like, you're gonna be in a movie with her, and she is like all eyes on her all the time. I feel bad that that's the case for a lot of people that have to be in movies with Elizabeth. But it's that thing of like, it's kind of that way too in Secret Ceremony, where I'm like, yeah, I mean, as much as like at the time Mia Farrow was the ingenue, right? She was like the young, like post Rosemary's Baby, cute little mod girl. But then she was in a movie with Elizabeth Taylor. So, I mean, how how could she even compare in a lot of ways, which is, Mia Farrow is a great actress too, like Susannah York, but it's that thing where like, but it's Elizabeth Taylor. I don't know. You can try.
She's just a little mouse in there.
Yeah.
Everybody gets sucked away. Do you think she was aware of that? Do you think Taylor was aware of that quality?
I know. I think she probably was. I mean, as much as she's probably like, I mean, who knows? Maybe she did admit it. Maybe she was like, yes, I am a star and I upstage literally everybody I'm on screen with and I don't give a shit. I just feel like some people have it. Some people just have that essence. And like if she was like 11 years old and people were like stopping in the street being like, who is this beautiful woman with double eyebrows or whatever, or eyelashes, that was like
double eyebrows. Ooh, that would be
that would be fun. Even though Elizabeth Taylor did have great eyebrows in her life, but that's true. That double, like I read that whole thing about her, she's got like a double row of eyelashes or something, which is why her eyes are so, I mean, besides the fact that they have nice, they're like purple or something, but it's that like she has like double eyelashes, and so her eyes just really popped because of it, and people would just be like, oh my god, who is this young woman, this 11-year-old with these amazing eyelashes, like
woman eyes? Yes.
I mean,
and you're soulful and sad. I think she maybe lost some parts for that, if I remember right. So yeah.
I mean, she probably knew to a certain degree just because she'd just been, I don't know what that's like, obviously. Like I'm sitting here like thinking to myself, but every time I think about that, when I think about how beautiful she actually was and how, this was her entire life. Yeah. Both for good and bad. But I would be like, I can't even imagine what that must be like to like be like this world famous star, this like celebrity, this beauty, and just knowing that about yourself, and that kind of, I just think that's fascinating over like what happens with people when they have that experience, and then later in life, obviously too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see her as lacking in generosity or anything like that. I think you're right in what you're basically saying is she just was, and it was just thrown on her, and I think that causes me to give her a lot of slack with things that she's done. Like when there's things where she seems like she's acting like a bit of a princess, it's like, well, you all crowned her, right? She didn't ask for this. If you're going to tell her that's what she is, she's going to act that way.
Yeah, and she was like, from the things that I've read about her, she cared like very deeply about people, and she was definitely a person who was an empath and wanted to take care of people. I mean, you read all those things about her in Montgomery Clift. I don't think that even though she was beautiful and maybe knew that she was beautiful, it never stopped her from being a kind person. Yeah,
she has a lot of decades-long friendships behind her.
Yeah, and just like her work with AIDS and all of the foundations that she worked with, and I don't know, I think at the end of the day, she still cared for others and felt kinships with people who were sort of lost or struggling.
I do think that that's the true Elizabeth. Yeah. And that it's remarkable that she was able to let so much of that out in the end, especially with the AIDS work, because that was so brave. Yeah. Think about how nobody would even talk about it, and she got the loudest bullhorn and did it. I think that's her in a nutshell. And that's what I think that's what I really love about this period when I think about it, is that she's kind of being brave about these choices. Yeah. There's another one, the driver's seat. Another one of her, I mean, on first look, it just seems bonkers. Yes. But if you slow down a little bit and look at it again, if you read the source novel by Muriel Sparks, it's like, oh gosh, it seems so deliberate then.
That book is bonkers. Like I just recently reread it because they, I don't even know if I'm allowed to say this, but I'll say it. Yeah. But they're basically working on a Blu-ray of it finally. What? And I don't really know if I have information, but I also like don't know what the status is, so I feel like
I leave it a little foggy. Leave it foggy.
Yeah, I'll leave it I'll leave some fogginess to it, but they're working on a Blu-ray of it, and I'm participating in it in some regard. Hopefully, we'll see. So I reread the book and have rewatched the movie a few times. The book is nuts. So there's a moment where you're like, oh, this is some, again, legendary, crazy bananas cult film that Elizabeth Taylor did in Europe. But then you're like, Oh, but the book is in and of itself. The source material is also really over the top.
Yeah.
So
in a different way, but I mean, it follows a lot of the same beats, but it's kind of in a different way. You get more that I suppose I should provide some background here. I don't know how much people know about The Driver's Seat, but
yeah, go ahead.
Muriel Sparks wrote The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, and it has written several kind of subversive novels about women taking control of their own fates and sometimes suffering for it. And the thing about The Driver's Seat is it's woman deciding how she ends her life, basically. She's picking who wins it for and how it happens. And that to me was a little difficult to understand in the movie at first.
Yeah,
because everything is so strange. Like that shopping, she meets this woman, this older woman, and they go shopping together. And you're just listening to the strangeness of their speech, talking about dirty novels and whether to buy some gloves, just these mundane things. But the way they talk about it is so strange.
Yeah, and in the book, it's not. Yeah, I think the book is actually pretty short. I think, it's like more like a novella. But even when I was reading the book and trying to divorce everything that I knew from the movie, I was like, wow, this is like a strange interaction. It's also the whole beginning part where she goes into the store and she's trying on the dress or whatever. In the book, it felt weird. Like, I was like, what is going on with this? Why is she yelling at the store people about this dress? And in that moment, I was like, okay, well, here we are being set up to book it in and of itself is like laying out this character as being very strange. You just try, and as the book goes on, you just try to figure out like why that is.
Yeah.
And so I feel like in a way, maybe that is a hard task to turn into a film, just like this idea of this story.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I mean, it's, to me, I looked at the book again going like, how did they make this a movie? It's so deeply weird just from a narrative perspective, but they attempted it and they got Liz to do it, which I don't know. After you read the book, did you think that she was perfect for that?
Not at all. I thought she had made it work and made it her own. I would have never cast her in it. I did the same thing. I tried to kind of set myself apart. It's hard for me to do this with Sparks novels because I read the ones, I've read the ones that were adapted first. So I've seen the film first, but I do see them as being a completely different thing. So I was trying to do that. And that was the only way I could pull things apart was I would have never in a million years cast Elizabeth Taylor in this role. And yet she makes it work. She even makes herself as gorgeous as she is seem like the somewhat ordinary person this is supposed to be. And I don't know how she does that. I mean, sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it doesn't work. Like The Only Game in Town, Hammersmith is out. She tries to play these working class women and it just doesn't work for me. I just don't buy it.
Yeah. She's almost like too glamorous.
Yeah. You're not going to be this humble woman in a 1-bedroom apartment somewhere. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I totally agree. There are just some things that you just can't set aside what you know about the person. Have you ever seen, so, I feel like this is maybe like an early entry to this part of her career, but one of my favorite roles of hers is Reflections in a Golden Eye, which I feel like it is sort of that early era of like she is moving towards the full scope of this period.
Yeah.
But that movie is that movie for being a chock full of like Hollywood stars, Hollywood director, obviously a very popular book. I'm like, this is one of the most deeply weird films I've ever seen in my entire life. And considering that it's Brando, Elizabeth Taylor, you know what I mean? Like, you're just going, how did this movie get so weird? And
it's the one where I did read the book first.
Yeah.
And I did think she was perfectly cast in that instance. It was the right energy where it's this gorgeous woman getting away with everything and just not caring about what happens. And she can play that role. Even if she wasn't that person, she can play that role.
Right.
Because she has some of that feeling,
Yeah.
Like she could have turned to the dark side and she didn't,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I always love when she would do a Southern accent, like anytime she would do like in Giant or whatever. It's like, anytime she would do a Southern accent, it was a little over the top, inherently over the top. I don't know if that's a thing that term exists, but in Reflections on a Golden Eye, it's just sort of like she's kind of got that. She's very much like got the Southern accent going, but she's very like big, like a bit of a sex kitten. But then she's just like wild. Like she's wild. Like the part where she's like whipping Marlon Brando with like the horse whip. And she's just like, I mean, in the door and everybody's like staring at her. And I was like, wow, this is what I'm talking about right here.
Yeah, she
like,
put her weight on it.
Yeah, she did. Like she was like
that shoulder was going back.
Yes. And she's like, my horse, my father. Like, I'm like, wow, this is what I live for. I love this whole vibe to her. Yeah, that movie is very strange. But I deeply appreciate it. And it's just because I feel like I'm from the South. And so I'm always like, of course, you know, you grow up, you know, as a Southern person and you're like, oh, you definitely know who Carson McCullers is. And you've definitely heard these types of stories, but then to see it played out with someone as famous as Elizabeth Taylor, you're like, oh my God, amazing.
Where her Southern accent is like a little drunk and loud. That's the Southern accent.
So true. So true.
You know, I really feel like that's where it began. There's like little sprinklings, even in Butterfield 8, you could see a little bit of it, but
I was going to say 100%. Right.
Yeah. But where it was like flowering, where you knew, and I think I saw that before I saw all those other movies. So I had it in my head.
Yeah.
When I finally see X, Y, and Z, I'm like, what is this little bit of magic I'm seeing, you know?
Yeah.
Okay. So what have we missed that must be discussed? Is there anything you feel like we've heard? I even made a list. I think we kind of covered it all.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's been a while since I've seen The Only Game in Town, but I know that one's, you know, kind of a movie from this era that's a lot of people talk about. I mean, the only other thing I would mention is Ash Wednesday, which is kind of like hard to find, I feel like, or it used to be. I think I saw it on YouTube.
Yeah.
But that movie is almost kind of like, I mean, it kind of feels like performance art in a lot of ways, like with like, she's at one point wearing bandages. She's kind of got the whole, like, I don't know. It kind of is that eyes without a face look where she's walking through the hallway of this hospital and she's completely bandaged. And you can tell everything from the face down is Elizabeth Taylor. She's just like her hand movements and her walk and everything, but then she's just bandaged. It's like surgery glam. I don't know how to describe it, but
that was bizarre to me because she's so gorgeous. And why is this cranky husband of hers? How could you reject this?
Yes. And I think that's too another part of that. I keep using the word psychobitty, Grand Dame Guignol tradition, right? Is that a lot of these roles, and this isn't just Elizabeth Taylor, but a lot of these roles that these classic era actresses were now taking. The characters were always being rejected by husbands, being rejected by family members, getting cheated on, you know, with like women half their age. So they were always just sort of being rejected for essentially just being like a middle-aged woman and then having these very extreme reactions, right? And, you know, obviously that's something that is important to me as a woman, just seeing that messaging, but also in a way reclaiming that messaging, being like, well, hell yeah. Like if she's going to go crazy, let her go crazy, right? Because she deserves to go crazy or something. You know what I mean? Like in that moment where you're, yes, absolutely kill all. Just do what you have to do. It's just, I guess, maybe taking a little bit of the power back in that situation. But I feel like that's a lot of these movies. I mean, that's like X, Y, and Z. That's Ash Wednesday. That's a lot of this stuff. So
I think you've hit the core of it. There's so many things to love about that period, but I think that's what it really is. And it's not as simple as rebelling against the MGM child stardom. It's just the whole idea of being a woman in middle age and how you matter and you're not going to fade away.
Right.
Yeah. And how you fight against that in the biggest, loudest, ugliest way, which kind of ends up being gorgeous, you know? So yeah. Oh, Millie, I'm so glad we had this conversation.
Oh, me too.
I feel like I have finally breathed out this subject. I wanted to talk about it for so long. So I really appreciate you coming on and talking to me about it. Thank you very much.
Oh my gosh. Anytime my sister in late 60s, 70s, Elizabeth Taylor appreciation. I appreciate you.
It's an important club and I appreciate you as well. Thank you.
Yes. You're welcome.
For more information, including where to follow Millie on social media and listen to a podcast, go to watchingclassicmovies.com. If you're enjoying the show, I invite you to follow, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Thank you for your support. This is Kendall Kruver, watching classic movies. Until next time.